Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 44 event, which takes place in San Antonio, Texas. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will only be able to help on 2 total bouts. Pay attention to our staff picks article on MMAoddsbreaker.com because we might change a play depending on how people look at the weigh-ins. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, MMA Oddsbreaker Premium went 2-1 for UFC 174 to win 2 units overall. We won our plays on Rory McDonald and Michinori Tanaka, but Josh Shockley cost us in the first bout of the evening. We also lost a 1-unit free bet, a parlay on the totals between the Phillips Letourneau bouts and the Jimmo St. Preux. Now, back to the present, UFC Fight Night 44 features an 11 fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary portion on Fight Pass will be a heavyweight contest featuring Alexei Oleinik, who is 48-13-1, taking on Anthony Hamilton, who is 12-2. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Hamilton minus 150 to come back on Oleinik plus 110, and the line has flipped. Early action coming in on Oleinik, the submission specialist. And I guess I can see why. I mean, both these guys, to be honest with you, I'm having a hard time picking this fight because both of them are so severely flawed in many ways. I mean, these are 2 heavyweights that, I mean, Hamilton's the younger guy of the 2. He's 34. Oleinik's 37. Oleinik definitely has some skill set, and he should have been in the UFC, I think, a while back, and he would have possibly had a more successful career. I mean, overall, for fighting outside of the UFC, well, he's been in Bellator or whatever, as well, but I'm saying overall, he's had a successful career, but he could have, I guess, cemented his place in history a little bit more so, by getting some, W's in the UFC here. So he's got potentially a fight that he can win here against Hamilton. I mean, Oleinik's best attribute is definitely taking the fight to the ground, and he's a submission specialist, no doubt about it. He's very smooth underground. He's good from top or bottom. Of course, he's a lot better from top position. He loves his neck cranks. He loves his arm triangle chokes, rear naked choke type of guy. But he's, like I said, very sneaky smooth underground. The problem is his takedowns and his wrestling really aren't that great. I think Hamilton's actually going to have the wrestling advantage in this fight. And if it does stay upright, I think Hamilton has a good possibility of knocking him out as well. Oleinik has been knocked out in his career 4 times. He does have a suspect chin, and, you know, with time going by, I don't think it's going to help him. I mean, he is 37 years old. Hamilton, I think, is actually coming into his own, finding his groove, getting a little bit more confidence. Of course, he just recently won the MFC heavyweight title, so that should only help. He's training with good training partners as well, spending some of his time at Greg Jackson's camp as well. So a lot of good things about Hamilton, although he's not that good either. I mean, on the feet, he does have a little bit of power. I mean, he just won a fight recently by head kick knockout, which is impressive, but still a little bit flukish when it comes to that kind of thing, I think. But he does have some power in his hands as well. But more than anything else, he does have decent wrestling. He likes to take the fight to the floor, work his ground and pound, get superior position, and really finish his opponents off that way. He does not want to take, I think, Oleinik to the ground here. Or if he does, he wants to definitely stay on top and try to land some ground and pound. But he's got to have to be careful doing so, because Hamilton, I think his submission game is definitely lacking as far as sub-defense goes. And with a fighter as smooth as Oleinik, I think he could possibly lose that way, of course. So, but I think more times than not, Hamilton at this stage, I think will probably get the W here, because I think he's going to eventually find Oleinik's chin. I think he can possibly get and maintain top position more often than not. If it does hit the ground, like I said, it might not be the best idea for him, but I think he can do that. And again, as far as chins go, both of them are a little bit suspect. I mean, Hamilton did get knocked out he didn't get knocked out. He got submitted by Scherner, but still, he got rocked in that fight before, he ended up getting finished, which is scary. So not much confidence either way here, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Hamilton. Despite the early action coming in the other way, I think Hamilton, at least at this stage in his career, there's a little bit more upside to him. But again, it's a tough fight, man. I could realistically see it go either way.
And I'm going to slightly disagree on this one. I actually favor Olenek. The main reason, I just think Olenek is much more experienced against significantly better competition throughout his career. Yeah, they're both old, but that's the thing, is they're both, Olenek's 37, but Hamilton's 34. That's not really an advantage for Hamilton being 3 years younger, especially at heavyweight, where age isn't quite as big of a deal. Now, Olenek is nicknamed the boa constrictor because, he's incredibly gifted with chokes. If he gets a fight to the canvas, you're in big trouble. The guy, can latch anything on, whether it's a rear naked choke, an arm triangle choke. He's actually famous for using the Ezekiel choke, which is a choke that's used more in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with a gi. Usually you choke them with their own uniform, and he's able to do that in MMA, which is just incredible. Now, while he is very dangerous on the canvas, I think he's actually not terrible on the feet. Obviously, he's not a good striker, but he has an okay left jab, and he's got some decent power. When he feels he has an advantage on the feet, he will press the issue. He'll throw some pretty wide looping hooks, but obviously he does prefer to go to the canvas. Now, the problem here with Hamilton is, while he does train at a good gym with Jackson's, he's just not explosive. He's really not that much of an athlete. He's kind of lumbering. His biggest advantage in this fight is how big he is. Hamilton's 6'5". He's going to be pushing the heavyweight limit of 265 when they step in the cage. So Hamilton will probably be about 20 to 30 pounds bigger than Olenek, and probably about 3 or 4 inches taller than Olenek. But he definitely does not have Olenek's skills. So that's going to be the big trade-off, is will the size and strength factor in and be enough to overcome? Because on the feet, I think Hamilton, more than anything, he's got that head kick that he used to knock out Smilino Rama to win the MFC title, but that's not something he can really rely on. It's not something he throws often. It was more fluky. And most of his damage actually comes whether with takedowns or in the clinch. He's actually very dangerous in the clinch just because he can smother you against the fence, and he's so big it's tough to get him off. So that's probably where he'll have the biggest advantage in the octagon against Olenek. But if he goes to the ground, his top control is not very good. People are usually able to sweep him or get out from under him very easily. And I think if he goes for a takedown, which is kind of ingrained in his brain, that he's going to be in big trouble. But so unless he's able to implement a game plan that really smothers Olenek against the fence over the course of 3 rounds, I see Olenek outworking him both on the feet and on the ground. So my pick is Alexei Olenek. Now, dropping all the way down to the flyweight division for the first bout on the FS1 prelims, we have Ray Borg, who is 6-1 overall, taking on late replacement Shane Howell, who is 13-7. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, Borg opens up as a steep favorite, -600. The comeback on Howell is +400. Line has moved since. Ray Borg is all the way down to -420. The comeback on Howell is +300. So early action support on the dog here. I know that it's probably, the opening line was probably an eyesore to most, thinking, man, Ray Borg after one fight with the UFC is that much of a favorite. So I think there's people taking shot on the dog Howell here, because he's going to have some physical advantages in this fight. I mean, Howell is very lanky and pretty tall for the weight class for 125. He's 5'8", so he's going to have a decent reach advantage. I believe pure reach, he's going to have like 6 inches over Borg on the feet. But other than that, I mean, honestly, he's a late replacement fighter, so there's some question marks there. He hasn't fought for a couple years, I think a little bit over 2 years as well, so there's some question marks with Howell there as well. And he is aggressive on the feet, but he tends to get a little bit wild. So I think with his aggression, he leaves a lot of openings as well. So he's not that bad on the ground, but that's gonna be his problem against Borg, because Borg is a submission whiz. I mean, his wrestling, his grappling is outstanding. And how, if anything, I mean, if any weakness at all in his game, it is also his ground game. I mean, his submission defense, he's been subbed 4 times in his career. He does tend to make some mistakes on the ground, and with a fighter like Borg, you cannot do that. And I do think that Howell's takedown defense is probably not good enough to deal with Borg. So I think Borg is going to come in and do what he does best. I mean, his striking's actually, Borg's striking's not that bad. He's going to be a little bit quicker on the feet. He has a little bit of power. He mixes things up well. But what he does the best is kind of close the distance, get inside, and manage to get top position and then work his submission game and his ground game. So I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. I don't expect the fight to last too long. I think if Borg is going to find his opening, get the fight to the floor pretty quick, take Howell's back, and probably sink in the rear naked choke and end this fight. So I think, again, the early action is a little bit misleading, and I do think Ray Borg is probably the side here. I mean, the guy is so impressive. I know he lost to Ortiz, a controversial loss in his UFC debut, but the kid's still relatively young. I believe he's 20 years old. I mean, there's huge upside to Borg. He's only going to continue to improve his overall game, and he's eventually going to be a title contender at 125. No doubt about that. So you got to go with Borg here.
And I completely agree. Ray Borg is just way too much for Shane Howell here. There's a 10-year age gap, but the biggest difference is the fact that Howell's taken this fight on very short notice, stepping in for Ryan Benoit, and I just don't think that's nearly enough time. I don't think if he'd had a full training camp, this fight would even be close. But the fact that it's a short training camp makes it even worse. Borg is just so slick. I mean, for fighters so young at 20 years old, he is so technical and so talented on the canvas. He is a incredible grappler. He has great sweeps. His scrambles are fantastic. The striking is still a work in progress, but he needs to take this fight to the ground if he wants to have a lot of success. But when he gets the fight to the ground, his ground and pound's excellent. His submissions are great. He's very aggressive in terms of advancing position. The sky is just the limit with this kid. I'm a very big Ray Borg fan. Now, Howell, not so much. I mean, he's basically an opportunist, stepping in here. He's, out of R1 MMA with some, trains with some UFC vets, the same gym that has, James Head, Matt Grice. And, while his record is 12 or 13-7, it's deceptive. He is 10-2 over his last 12 fights, and he does have a win over Tim Elliott on his record. Granted, that was in 2009. That was ages ago. Most of his wins have been, over recent, more local type of competitions. And he really hasn't fought in about 2 years. So that also is a huge question mark. Overall, I think on the feet, this fight will be relatively even. Howell is more of a brawler. And he has decent submission skills, but he's just nowhere near Borg if the fight goes to the canvas. So his best chance is to probably make this fight real ugly on the feet. And I just don't see him being able to implement that game plan against somebody that's as focused and talented as Ray Borg. So I'm definitely picking Ray Borg here. Now moving back up to the middleweight division, we have Marcelo Guimarães, who is 8-1-1, taking on Andy Enns, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Enns minus 180, Guimarães plus 140 was my opening line, and the line is actually staying steady. Again, letting everybody know the lines are relatively fresh and new. They've only been out there for a few hours, and 5dimes. .eu is actually the only place that is offering full UFC Fight Night 44 lines. So keep that in mind here. Lines are still relatively new. But going back into this here, Enns is minus 180 again. Guimarães is plus 140. This is an interesting fight. I mean, Guimarães is going back up to 185. I mean, that's a little bit interesting. He's been out for over a year, so we got to hit that right away. And so there's some question marks around Guimarães in this fight. I mean, overall, he's not a very impressive fighter. I mean, grappling is his best attribute. He does have decent wrestling in most cases. And once he gets the fight to the floor, he's got okay ground and pound control and BJJ overall, but he does have predictable takedowns. And that's one of his flaws. I mean, you could definitely see his takedowns coming, and more times than not, you could stuff him and keep the fight upright against him. So I think against Enns, he's going to need to take the fight to the floor and try to grind Enns out. And he might have success early on, landing a couple takedowns here against Enns, because Enns doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, but it definitely is improving. And once you get Enns, though, on his back, he does manage to scramble up more times than not. So he does have decent ground awareness. So I think more than likely this fight is going to stay upright, and you got to favor Enns in that spot. Enns is a tough young fighter. He's got a ton of heart. He's got solid kickboxing. He stays busy, pushes forward. On the ground, he's decent. Especially from top control. He's got good ground and pound. And again, I mean, he does get put on his back from time to time, but he manages to scramble pretty quick. So Enns is a pretty solid, complete fighter overall. Again, he's young as well. He's only 22 years old, so he's going to have the youth advantage over Guimarães in this spot. And I think there's a bigger upside to Enns. So for me, I think Guimarães is going to have to kind of make this a boring fight, get some takedowns, kind of stall the action against Enns to win this. But if not, I think he's going to get picked apart, and Enns is going to end up landing more on him, and he's probably going to get the W here. So I'm going to lean towards Enns in this spot. I think he is the better fighter. He's got possibly more ways to win this fight. He just has to keep upright and not let Guimaraes control the fight.
And I agree. I think that this time around, Guimaraes is a guy that was really hyped up. He was the Jungle Fights middleweight champion, and it just never really panned out. People were really praising his ground and pound, his takedowns, his offensive submission game, but honestly, in his fights, he's not able to get the takedowns very often, and when he does, he's not able to do a ton with them. So it just, that part of his game that was his biggest strength just hasn't been there. And honestly, if we were going to see something out of Guimaraes, we should have seen it in his UFC debut over Dan Stitkin, a guy that went 0-2 and kind of washed out of the promotion. And Guimaraes barely skated past him. I mean, that was a close split decision. And, if you want to make a statement in the division, you got to go out there and crush that type of fighter. And he just didn't do it. And I just think, Guimaraes, the hype he didn't live up to the hype, and now he's 31 years old. He's coming off an injury, and he's facing a rising up and comer. And this is a spot where you got to favor the up and comer. Guimaraes' time kind of is already passed. He just looks a little old in there. Honestly, watching Guimaraes fight, and granted, this was at welterweight, he was having trouble getting takedowns. He was shooting a little too far from the outside. They were pretty easy to stuff. All you really had to do was push down on his head as he dove in. And then, and on the feet, he was very stiff. It looked like he was real tense and robotic when he was throwing strikes, although occasionally he did land a couple nice shots. But, most of the time, he's pretty easy to avoid. And, he walked right into a huge knee in his last fight against Hyung-Ju Lim and got knocked out. And, Enns, on the other hand, he's 9 years younger, so that's a big plus for him. Trains out of the lab, and he is all heart. He's a well-rounded young fighter, and there's just no quitting this kid. I mean, he fought on The Ultimate Fighter against Uriah Hall with a broken arm and made the fight competitive. And then in his UFC debut against Clint Hester, another pretty solid middleweight on the rise, he looked real good. He rocked Hester at one point, and that was after he got rocked in the first round. He's just tough as nails, and he's all heart. So that's the type of fighter that I like. He's definitely got the right mentality of a fighter. He just needs to continue adding those parts to his game, and I think he's doing it in the right spot by going to the lab. That's a great gym for rising up and coming fighters. And on the feet, he should have a pretty significant advantage over Guimaraes. He's going to be a lot bigger, a lot longer. It's going to be even more difficult for Guimaraes to implement that type of game plan against him. And I just think that Enns should be able to outwork him. And if it does go to the ground, because Enns does occasionally give up takedowns, he should be able to work his way back to his feet and keep going after him. And I just think he's going to wear Guimaraes down. He's got a pretty good gas tank, and Enns should win this fight, probably by decision, but who knows? He might be able to finish him just like Lim did. So my official pick is Andy Enns. Now dropping back down to the bantamweight division, we have Johnny Bedford, who is 19-11-1 with one no contest, taking on Cody Gibson, who's 11-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Bedford minus 210, Gibson plus 160 was my opening line. Right now over at Dimes, it's minus 195 for Bedford, Gibson plus 155. So just very tiny movement on this fight so far on the dog. And you know what, man? I have to lean that way a little bit, believe it or not. I know Bedford's really tough, proven veteran. I mean, especially 135 guys looks great. He's usually has some length and some reach over most of his opponents. He's not really going to have that against Gibson. I think actually they're the same height and the reach is about the same as well. So that makes things a little bit interesting here. But I mean, as far as Bedford goes, he's a very talented guy at bantamweight, no doubt about it. The guy has pretty solid striking on the feet. He's got some knockout power to go along with it. On the ground, he's got good wrestling, good takedown defense. He's got a good offensive submission game. So he's a really all-around solid fighter. And Gibson, I mean, this should be kind of an uphill battle for him, but I think that with his improvement level, I mean, he's a little bit younger again. The youth is on his side. He's only 26 compared to Bedford, I believe, is 31. And he's constantly improving his overall game. I mean, he finally made his UFC debut. He performed pretty well in that fight despite being, on the losing end of things there. And he showed his overall game as well. So I'm expecting a really tight battle back and forth in this fight because Gibson's got so much heart. I don't think it's going to be easy for Bedford to get rid of him on the feet. I think Gibson's actually going to hang in there even on the feet as well. And he could probably get some scrambles, some takedowns, possibly even catch Bedford's back. And on the ground, I mean, both these guys defensively are flawed as far as sub-defense goes. They both made some strides and some improvements in those areas. But I think that, Gibson could potentially finish the fight on the ground as well. He could take Bedford's back or something like that happen. And, one of these guys make a mistake and the fight could be over that quick. So I do think, Gibson does push a high pace as well, and I think he's going to put himself in a good spot here and be very, very competitive with Bedford. So even though he came into the UFC and he's 0-1 and Bedford's a little bit more proven, fought better competition overall, I think this is a winnable fight for Gibson. And I think there's more upside to Gibson as well. So I think we're going to see him perform even better than he did in his debut. And if he does that, I think this again a winnable spot for him. So I'm going to pick the underdog here, and I think there is probably some value with Gibson at plus 150, plus 160 around that spot. So I got to go with my heart and my head, and it says that Gibson's probably going to perform well and pull off the upset here.
Gibson's a nice story, but I just don't think this one's going to have a happy ending. Honestly, my problem with Gibson heading into this fight is that he's not a full-time fighter. He works as a substitute teacher, and he's been doing that for about the last 3.5 years. And usually, it's very difficult for guys to make drastic leaps in improvement in their overall MMA game if they're not training full time. And we know Johnny Bedford is working very hard. And I will give Gibson some props. Honestly, in his last fight, he made some great leaps. He looked a lot better than he did in a lot of his film on the local regional scene. But he was facing a really tough guy in Aljamain Sterling, a Sarah Longo prospect. And he just got outworked over the course of 3 rounds. This time around, I think, Johnny Bedford, he's a guy that's been around the UFC. He's had some trouble against good wrestlers, guys that can take him down, or guys with good power, guys that are really quick. And I really don't think that Gibson will be that much of a threat. Gibson has some good wrestling himself, but Bedford was a decent wrestler in high school. He's got that to fall back on. And I don't think Gibson's wrestling is enough to really overwhelm him over the course of 3 rounds. He might take him down every once in a while, but Bedford should be able to get up. He's not Brian Caraway. And I think on the feet, Bedford has a pretty big power advantage. He's a big, imposing bantamweight. He's got good, solid punching ability. He mixes it up. And if he gets you cornered along the fence, you're in big trouble, because once he starts unloading some combinations, he will get the finish. He's very aggressive, and I think this will be a very tough fight for Gibson, especially taking it on relatively short notice. So my pick's going to be Johnny Bedford, and I think that Gibson will show a lot of heart, but it'll definitely be Bedford for me. So moving up to the lightweight division, we have Colton Smith, who is 6-3 overall, taking on UFC newcomer Carlos Diego Ferreira, who is 9-0. So, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Ferreira minus 350 to come back on Smith, plus 250. I'm looking over at the line right now. Some dog action on Smith coming in, and it's down to minus 265 for Ferreira. The comeback is plus 185 on Smith. Man, I got a lot of respect for Colton Smith. I really do. I think he's one of these guys that continues to improve his overall game. He's a tremendous grappler. He's even improving his stand-up a little bit. He's got some power on the feet. And he's just a grinder and a hard worker. I mean, you got to respect his work ethic and his improvement for sure. But this is just a nightmare matchup for him. I know Ferreira is making his UFC debut, and he's coming in as a steep favorite. But man, the guy is a very talented prospect in his own right. I mean, the guy is slick everywhere the fight takes place. I mean, he specializes with his groundwork. I mean, he's a very good jiu-jitsu practitioner, no doubt about it. I mean, he's very smooth with his wrestling. He's got decent wrestling in his own right. He's got great transitions. Even from the bottom, he scrambles up. He's got terrific submission skills. And then on the feet, he just keeps on improving his game. I mean, the guy's becoming a little sniper. He's got some power to go along with it. He mixes everything up well. He just has huge potential overall. And if you look at it, I mean, Smith's only real shot of winning this fight is either possibly just catching Ferreira on the feet with, some power, because again, Smith does have a little bit of power on the feet for sure. I mean, he's got that strong wrestler's, strength going into this fight for sure. So he's got some power on the feet, but he's not as technical as Ferreira. So I think he's going to kind of have to land a lucky punch in order to do that. On the ground, Smith might be able to control a little bit as far as getting a takedown or two or pinning him up against a cage, but Ferreira transitions and scrambles out so well that Smith is not going to be able to maintain position. These guys have grappled in last year in a pure BJJ grappling match, and if you look at the footage, it is available out there on YouTube. They were competitive back and forth. It was pretty close, but Ferreira definitely, I think, outmaneuvered him. He got transitioned a lot better, so he won the ground battle, and I think that's basically Smith's main way of, controlling and winning most fights is on the ground. So he's not going to be able to do that against Ferreira. Ferreira's going to be able to scramble up, get in better position. And if the fight does stay on the feet, Ferreira's just the better striker. So that's why it's such a nightmare matchup. I mean, Ferreira's had some buzz and some hype, surrounding him for a while now. So I'm glad he's finally making his UFC debut, and I think it is going to be a successful one. It's a fight that he can definitely win. So much respect to Colton Smith, but unfortunately for him, I think he's going to lose this fight.
And I agree. I think both of these guys are pretty talented fighters, although the problem with Smith is I think he listened to his critics a bit too much. He wasn't the most entertaining when he was winning the Ultimate Fighter. He was using his wrestling, he was laying and praying in guys, and that's how he won the Ultimate Fighter in the finale. But this time around, we saw in his most recent couple performances, he kind of abandoned the takedown a little bit. He came in looking to brawl, and he ended up getting knocked out by Robert Whittaker, and he didn't have a very good performance against Michael Chiesa either. So that is a bit of a problem. And I think going in there against a guy like Carlos Diego Ferreira, who is just so talented, he's going to have some issues here as well. Ferreira, I think, is better than him on the ground, and he's better than him on the feet. I think the only real advantage that Colton Smith has for this fight is perhaps the offensive wrestling. He could potentially get the takedown and then stay on top and ride out a decision. It wouldn't be the most entertaining thing, but that's probably his best method to victory, because on the feet, I think he's outclassed, and if it does stick around on the canvas and he leaves too many openings, I think he's going to be outclassed. Now, looking back at their last grappling contest that they actually had last year, one thing that you have to keep in mind is while Ferreira looked very good, he was throwing all kinds of submission attempts and putting Smith in some precarious positions from bottom. It was from bottom. And if Smith is able to stick around on top position over the course of 3 rounds, or even just 2 out of 3 rounds, he could steal a decision here just because the judges do favor the guy on top. So that is a little scary that Ferreira is a little too comfortable off of his back. But I think Ferreira's a little too smart for that. His MMA grappling is very sound. And then once you start mixing in strikes and all that kind of stuff, I think he'll be in pretty good shape because, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they don't mind if you're on bottom. But in this fight, I just don't really see a big method for victory here for Colton Smith. I think it's going to be a rough night for him, and Ferreira's going to have a real sharp performance and maybe turn some heads. So my pick is Ferreira. Now, kicking off the main card, we have another lightweight contest between a pair of UFC newcomers in Joe Ellenberger, who is 14-1, taking on James Muntasri, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Ellenberger opens -210. The comeback on Muntasri +160. Right now over at 5 dimes, it's Ellenberger -270. So some support coming in there. Muntasri is +190 right now at the time of the recording, but some support coming in on Ellenberger. Muntasri is basically, he's taking this fight on short notice. He's just coming off of a successful win on Access TV, which he looked very good in. I should mention that as well. But he has taken this fight on relatively short notice. And his background is a Taekwondo fighter. I know that sounds crazy for being successful in MMA, but that's exactly what the storyline is. I mean, he's got world-class Taekwondo striking, but he's developed that in MMA. It's translated very well for him. I mean, he's got nasty power in his hands and the feet, really. He's very accurate with the striking. And again, he actually has developed pretty decent takedown defense overall. He's training at Black House, so he's getting top-notch world-class MMA training to go along with it. So he's developed a lot of skills that he much really needed to become a successful MMA fighter. So, I mean, the guy is dangerous on the feet. Again, he's got the takedown defense to make things interesting, keep it up in most cases. And then he does have some scrambling ability, of course. But if there's any weakness, for Muntasiri at this point, would be definitely his sub game, and probably his wrestling. That being said, that's exactly what he's going to face in Ellenberger. Ellenberger, of course, he's the brother of UFC, vet Jake Ellenberger, so he's got a similar actual skill set too, similar type of fighter. He does utilize his wrestling a little bit more. That's what differentiates Joe, I think, from Jake. Jake kind of tends to depend a little bit more on his striking because he's got such devastating knockout power, where Joe actually looks to take the fight to the ground a little bit more, utilizes wrestling. He transitions a little bit better, has some nice ground and pound, looks for the submission. And that's probably what he's going to want to do here against Muntasiri, because even though Ellenberger, even on the feet, he's not that bad. I mean, he's got decent boxing skills. He's got some power to go along with it. Not the devastating, nasty knockout power his brother Jake has, but he does have KO power in his own right. But I think it's still a difficult matchup for Ellenberger, because I think as the fight goes on, especially, round 2, round 3, he's going to struggle to take Muntasiri to the floor. And if he does that, I think Muntasiri's, his knockout skills definitely, far more superior than Ellenberger in this spot. I think Muntasiri, he's just so unorthodox with the striking, and he's so effective and accurate with his striking. I think he's going to eventually land on Ellenberger or do enough damage where he does keep it upright that he's going to sway the judges to give him the decision win as well. So there's a good chance Muntasiri does finish this fight, but if he does not finish the fight, I think there's a good chance he also wins by decision, a competitive decision, because Ellenberger is a very game fighter. He's coming in as a favorite for a reason. He does have some advantages in his fight, but I'm going to kind of go against the grain here and pick the short notice replacement Muntasiri. I think that he does have the skill set to make this an interesting fight, and if he does keep it upright, he's probably going to win the fight. So I'm going to lean with the dog here.
Did I hear an echo? Because I'm going to completely agree with you. I actually like James Muntasiri too. I know it's crazy. The guy just fought on June 6th, basically 3 weeks ago. He is taking this fight on very short notice, but he is so talented. This guy has a very bright future, and it really sucks for Joe Ellenberger, because, this is the 6th guy that he's been scheduled to face for his UFC debut, and it's probably the best one out of all 6 that have been scheduled. Muntasiri is just extremely talented. Watching him fight, he's dangerous on the feet with his hands. He's actually got some really good pop in both fists, but the scariest thing for him is his kicks. He's got that Taekwondo background, and we've seen that in several UFC fighters that have had some success, like John McDessie. And this kid is extremely athletic and explosive. He can throw out all kinds of wild and crazy kicking attacks. He was on the United States national team for Taekwondo, so that his kicking skills are extremely legit. You got to watch out for the spinning attacks. He's got some jumping attacks, and then just regular body and leg attacks. He's going to throw those with some serious pop. So if this kid's in open space, Ellenberger's going to be in some serious trouble. And as long as Muntasiri is able to keep this fight at distance, it's going to be very difficult for Ellenberger to get inside and implement some of that takedown game. Because we saw in his last fight against Jordan Rinaldi was very aggressive trying to pursue the takedown, and then he kind of walked into some big shots. Muntasiri he's faced this type of fighter before, and he's passed with flying colors. Now, Ellenberger, he's no slouch, obviously. He's getting this UFC debut for a reason. His only loss was to UFC fighter Justin Salas. He's talented. He's like his brother, as Nick mentioned, but he does have more of a focus on the ground game. Both of those Ellenberger brothers were solid wrestlers, but Joe is definitely the better usage of the ground game. He wants to take this fight to the canvas. He wants to get on top position. He wants to drop some punches. He wants to get a submission. He doesn't mind winning a decision using the wrestling. But that is very exhausting. And I'm not going to say that he's got bad cardio, but it's a little bit better than his brothers, but it's still not that great. So that is a concern as well, because if he has trouble getting the fight to the canvas, then Muntasiri is going to walk all over him on the feet. I really think it's going to be a tough fight for Ellenberger here. If he can't get this fight to the ground and probably even get a finish early, then Muntasiri is going to step up and come on strong and really land some nasty shots and make a name for himself here. So I'm picking James Muntasiri as well. Now moving on in the middleweight division, we have Clint Hester, who is 10-3 overall, taking on Antonio Braga Neto, who is 9-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Neto minus 160, the comeback on Hester plus 120. Line has tightened up. This line has been out for a while. Right now over dimes, it's Neto minus 150, the comeback on Hester plus 130. So it stayed basically ballpark. And what you got here is pretty clear cut. I mean, you have a developing, improving fighter in Hester. He's improving his overall skill set. I mean, the guy has some nasty power on the feet. So he swings, he swings for the fences every time, it seems like, when he does throw his bombs. But that does lead to him fading and gassing out a little bit in fights. If anything, his flaw on the ground is definitely his kryptonite. He can be put on his back. He can be submitted in fights, but he is getting better with his takedown defense. And he's been working very hard on that. I mean, we could tell, through interviews and just period watching him fight. I mean, you could definitely tell the improvement. I mean, he's talked about it and he's shown it in the octagon as well. So I'd like to see fighters making leaps and bounds in their overall skill set when it's much needed, like Hester is. I mean, he was basically a one-dimensional fighter, just basically a sloppy kind of heavy-handed striker. Now he's getting a little bit more technical with the striker, although he does throw again for the fences and gets a little wild at times on the feet, but it's been very effective for him. But his ground game is getting a little bit better. He's got good ground and pound when he does get top position as well. So he's becoming a more complete fighter. But unfortunately for him, he is facing a grappler. So you have your typical or your kind of classic throwback type of fight with your striker versus grappler. Neto is that grappler, and he's not just a grappler. He's a very extremely talented grappler. So I think in most cases, the fight hits the floor with Hester, Neto can get the fight to the ground. And once it does, I don't think Hester's going to be able to kind of withstand what Neto throws at him as far as the ground skill goes. Hester is making those improvements like I mentioned, but Neto's on a different level. He's a extremely talented Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He can submit you from the ground off his back. He can submit you, of course, from the top position as well. And he just constantly looking for that sub and looking for the kill. So I don't think Hester's actually going to land or last much, I should say, with Neto in this fight. I think Neto's going to be able to get the takedown early, maybe take Hester's back and probably finish him by submission pretty fairly quickly here. So I am going to lead with Neto, lean towards Neto in this fight. I think he's the more talented fighter. Both these guys, again, are at the stage in their careers where they're 26, 27 years old. So there's a lot of upside to both of them. I think they're going to continue to improve their skill set. Neto on the feet, he doesn't have that much to offer, but he is developing his game on the feet as well, and it's getting a little bit better, but he doesn't want to stand and bang with Hester at all. So his key to victory is definitely getting this fight to the ground and looking for that submission, and I think he is going to be successful, like I said, doing that. So my pick is going to be the grappler over the striker.
And I'm in complete agreement this time around as well. Both of these guys are very talented up-and-comers in the middleweight division. I just think Neto at this point is a little more polished when it comes to the ground skills. Actually, a lot more polished in the ground. Hester might, if this fight stays standing, Hester could definitely win it, but I just don't think it will. Hester still does have some issues on the canvas. He has improved it a little bit, and we've seen him actually go offensive and get some takedowns and drop some punishment in his last 2 fights. But if he does that against Neto, he is a dead man. He will lose his leg. He will be out unless he taps out. So he needs to be extremely careful in that department. Neto made a really impressive UFC debut. He destroyed Anthony Smith, got a really quick submission, and then we haven't seen him for a while. He's been out. He's been recovering from some injuries. But this kid is extremely talented. He might be the best ground fighter in the middleweight division, and I'm not joking, in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills. This kid is a lightning rod. You really got to watch out for him. The sky is the limit in terms of him, as long as he can continue to round out his game. Because on the feet, he probably is still going to be at a disadvantage. Hester has that boxing background. He's got a lot of power. He can finish you in all kinds of ways. He's got good punching power. He's got an elbow like he did against Bristol Marunde. He throws some decent kicks. So he is very dangerous with his power. But if Neto gets you on the ground, he is more dangerous. This guy is a finisher, and he has strong hips. He passes well, he's aggressive, and if he finds a submission, it doesn't really matter what the submission is. If it's a heel hook, he'll go on that. If it's an armbar, he'll go on that. And he can finish those types of submissions, those difficult types of submissions to finish. He's just so scary. So if this fight goes to the ground, I am 100% on board that Neto's going to win it. It just all comes down to whether or not Hester can avoid it. Because if he can't, this fight is clearly going to Neto. If he can, Hester definitely has a shot. But I'm going to go with Antonio Braga Neto as well. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have recent title challenger Ricardo Lamas, who is 13-3 overall, taking on Hakran Diaz, who is 21-2-1. Now Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Lamas opens -170, the comeback on Diaz +130. Since that time, a little bit more action has come in on Lamas. Right now, he's -190. The comeback on Diaz is +165. I think this is a tricky spot. I mean, Lamas is coming off that title defense, or I shouldn't say defense, the title loss to the hands, of course, of Jose Aldo. He performed a lot better than most people thought. I mean, definitely put the work in. Lamas is one of these guys that keeps on improving his overall game, and he deserved to get that title shot. I mean, the guy has ran through some solid competition at 145 as well. He's got a tremendous skill set. I mean, Lamas is pretty much good everywhere. He's got good wrestling. He's got good striking. He's a very complete fighter. He's got good jiu-jitsu to go along with it. Only flaw for Lamas has been his chin. And he did survive again against Jose Aldo. So, he fought smarter. His defense was a little bit better in that spot as well. So good to see that, improvement. But man, he does get clipped. That chin is a little bit suspect, so you got to definitely be concerned there. But he doesn't have to worry about that too much with Diaz in this spot here. I mean, Diaz is primarily a grappler. I mean, he's a tremendous, I think. I mean, outside, I know he got out-grappled by Lentz in their fight as well. And Lentz outpointed him to a clear-cut decision win. And I think Lamas is going to have to basically fight that same type of fight that Lentz did to be victorious against Diaz. And I think that's very possible. But I do think that the way these guys match up, Diaz is going to probably have a little bit more success in this fight than he did against somebody like Lentz. And I'm comparing it because Lentz, in my opinion, Lentz and Lamas are very similar types of fighters with skill sets. They're both outstanding grapplers. They both are decent on the feet as well. So it is a very similar type of matchup. But again, I think Diaz actually matches up a little bit better with Lamas as far as the overall grappling and aspect goes. And I think he's going to be able to probably make life difficult at times with Lamas. I'm expecting a very competitive decision in this spot. I don't think there's going to be a finish either way. But again, Diaz, he is improving his overall striking game. It is getting a little bit better. He's been out for a little while now. We should mention that as well. So, that is a concern a little bit there, but I think that we're going to continue to see some improvement again on the feet with Diaz. But other than that, he's going to push a high pace with Lamas. He's going to, I think, pin Lamas up against the cage a little bit, look for takedowns, just be all over him in the grappling realm. So I'm expecting again a very competitive fight. I got to lean slightly with Lamas because he is the more complete fighter. He has the better skill set overall. But man, I think it's another one of these situations as far as pure betting goes. It's probably a dog or pass situation because again, I think that Diaz is going to push enough of a pace and make the grappling aspect of this a lot more difficult for Lamas than everybody realizes. So I'm expecting a very competitive tight decision, but you got to give the slightest edge to Lamas in this spot.
And I agree that Lamas should win this fight. I think I believe in him a little bit more. I just think on the feet, Lamas should have a pretty distinct advantage. He's taken some nice steps and added some solid striking to his arsenal. He's not the scariest puncher in the UFC featherweight division, but he does have some really solid kicks. Who can forget the head kick, the switch kick he landed on Matt Grice? He throws some spinning attacks. Usually it's a little telegraphed, but he does have that in his arsenal, and that's something that, Hakran Diaz does not have. So if Lamas has space, he should definitely be landing the better strikes, throwing the better strikes, putting the better impression on the judges. And on the ground, Diaz is pretty scary. He has a good offensive grappling acumen. But something that really surprised me, everybody was hyping him up as this super prospect, but he's already 30 years old. Lamas is 32, but he's been in there against the best in the world, and Diaz really hasn't. The one time he stepped up against Lentz, he got outworked, although he did have a nice decision victory in his UFC debut over Alcantara. I just think that in this fight, Lamas, he has that wrestling base. That's what got him to where he is now. He earned his UFC title shot by getting on top of Eric Hogan, dropping some lethal ground and pound. Even in the 5th round against Aldo, he actually got a takedown, got on top, and won the 5th round. It wasn't enough to get the finish and win the belt, but he definitely left a good impression by winning the 5th round against the champion. And I think Lamas has plenty of gas on the tank. I mean, he proved it. Cardio really isn't a problem. He went all 5 rounds with Aldo and looked strong in the 5th. And I think I think he'll be able to outwork Diaz. Diaz will be aggressive, but I don't know if he'll be able to be aggressive for 3 full rounds. And as long as Lamas is taking him seriously, he should be fine. So I'm picking Lamas, and I think he has a little bit of an easier time here. Moving up to the middleweight division, we have a battle between former Ultimate Fighter Brazil winner Cesar Mutante Ferreira, who is 8-3 overall, taking on Andrew Craig, who is 9-2. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Ferreira minus 150, the comeback on Craig plus 110, and action has come in on Ferreira. He's up to minus 190 right now. The comeback on Craig is plus 165, so not surprising. I mean, Ferreira's been popular amongst the bettors for a long time now. And these guys actually are pretty similar type of fighters. Ferreira's just a little bit better in almost every area, I think, in this matchup. But man, it's hard to trust either one of these guys as far as defense goes, as far as chins go. I mean, both of them have been, rocked and put out. Well, I guess Craig doesn't have an official KO loss on his resume, but against Barnett, I mean, he got drilled, he got rocked. He's been rocked in, quite a few fights in the UFC. So his defense is that bad on the feet, and he does get clipped, and his chin hasn't, I mean, it's barely hung in there. And Ferreira, on the other hand, he has been knocked out a couple times, and glass chin, I mean, on both sides, big time. So that's a huge concern as far as betting this fight, both ways here. But I think Ferreira is the better overall offensive striker. I mean, he's got a lot of power on the feet. His accuracy's pretty good. He's a little bit more dangerous. And then on the ground also, he's got underrated wrestling. He's got decent jiu-jitsu to go along with it. He's got solid ground and pound. And then he's fighting a very similar guy in Craig. I think Craig offensively, he's not as effective as Ferreira on the feet, but he does have some power. He's definitely capable of landing that knockout punch as well. Craig also has some underrated wrestling to go along with it. And again, on the ground, he's not too bad either, but his sub defense and his pure BJJ, I don't think is as good as Ferreira's either. So, you got to give a very slight edge here to Ferreira. But again, going back to what I said a million times already, it's just hard to trust either one of these guys with their chins. I mean, the first person that makes a mistake, and they're both so defensively flawed on the feet, is going to probably get knocked out. I don't expect this fight to go the distance at all. But we could see this fight start off a little bit slower since these guys have been clipped so many times. I think they're going to be a little bit more cautious. So we could see a slow pace to start off the fight, but eventually, they're going to start throwing leather, and I think somebody's going down. I think both guys, as far as takedown defense goes, should be good enough to kind of keep this fight standing. We might see some clinch work against the fence, that sort of thing. But, man, I mean, from top to bottom, I think they're very similar fighters, but I got to go with a slight edge for Ferreira because I think he is just a little bit better.
And I agree. I think that Ferreira overall, he is just the better fighter. Craig, he's not the most technical guy, honestly. I mean, he's scrappy. He's a bit limited in striking, but he pushes the pace and he wears you down. He's had multiple UFC fights where he got in trouble early in a fight and then came on strong late to either get a finish or win a decision. That's just kind of the way he fights. And that often doesn't lead on to great and successful UFC careers. So, I think that it's starting to catch up to him. Obviously, you saw in his last fight, people thought he had a decent chin, and then Luke Barnett just tore him up. He had him in huge trouble in the first round and then completely dominated him early in the second round. So, this is a guy that's definitely on the decline in terms of chin. So that's definitely something to look out for. Now, Ferreira, that's his big weakness as well. He's got a ton of skill. He was the disciple of Vitor Belfort, and it looked like he was a huge hyped up prospect on the rise. But again, time and time again, what has caught up to him has been the chin. He almost got knocked out by Sergio Moraes in his UFC debut, fighting an undersized middleweight. He got knocked out by Elvis Mutapcic, a guy that couldn't even win the World Series of Fighting middleweight tournament, and then he got absolutely destroyed in his last fight by CB Dalloway. So, if this guy gets clipped, he gets in huge, huge trouble. So it's going to come down to who lands the first big shot, because both these guys have pretty bad chins. I think Ferreira, his chin is bad on a level where if he gets hit really hard, he just goes out cold. Craig will get rocked and try to hang in there a little bit, and maybe that could leave an opening to land a big comeback strike. But I think that Ferreira overall is just a little bit more technically sound, and he'll have fewer openings for Craig to take advantage of. So I'm going to go Ferreira as well. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you guys have definitely outlined a lot of the weaknesses for these two guys. Both of them have been susceptible to strikes. On one end, you've got Ferreira, who is an experienced grappler. He does have high-level jiu-jitsu, and maybe that's the reason why he eats so many punches. His head strike avoidance metric is the worst on the main card by a long shot. And he has been wobbled a couple times, and especially in his last fight, which was only 3 months ago, and that's not a long time to recover from a severe concussion. On the flip side, you've got Andrew Craig, and his knockdown defense, the number of knockdowns he's received, given the punches he's taken, is also, that's the worst on the card. So one guy's, he eats a lot of punches, sometimes falls down. One guy, he's got better strike avoidance, but he falls down a lot when he gets hit. Both these guys have weaknesses. And so I think that's at the core of a lot of our hesitancy here in choosing one side or the other. Ferreira's striking metrics have actually been pretty good. His accuracy is above average. He's controlled rounds, probably because he's a southpaw and he comes in with a very long reach for the middleweight division. He's almost got freakishly long arms, hence the nickname Mutante. But it's his grappling that I think might be the difference here. Andrew Craig has been able to grind out some wins with hustle. I think specifically against Chris Lieben, that was an upset that I was looking for. But this one, the leans go towards Ferreira, I think in all aspects. But it is tight and there is definitely some question marks here. So, the over-under limit is, only 1.5 rounds, which is unusual. And I think the market has recognized both guys' weaknesses. Playing that under is a tight call. They might take a little bit more time to open things up and develop. But the inside the distance play is actually pretty good value. So I think there's some prop potential here, that it does not go 3 rounds. And that line last I checked was only minus 165. So it's not unreasonable. But my leans are towards Ferreira, but obviously I have the same hesitations that you guys do.
Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a welterweight contest featuring Ultimate Fighter Season 17 winner Kelvin Gastelum, who is 9-0 overall, taking on Nico Musoke, who is 12-2 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Gastelum minus 505, Musoke plus 335. That was my opening number. Since that time, and this line has been out for a little while, Gastelum is now minus 380. The comeback of Musoke is plus 315. So more support on the dog here. And you know what? This is a tough fight for Musoke, I think. I mean, he's a very talented, well-rounded guy overall. I mean, he's got some skill on the feet. He's got some skill on the ground, obviously, too. He's a decent size, actually, for 170. He's got a little bit of power. But, man, Gastelum here, I think, has big advantages in this fight. I mean, Musoke, he has been rocked in his fights, of course, in the past as well as in the UFC. So there's a little bit of concern there with big power, and Gastelum does have definitely outstanding power on the feet as well. But not just that. I think Gastelum can control where the fight goes. He's got better grappling overall. He's got, again, more effective power on the feet as well. So I think this is kind of a nightmare matchup for him. Now, Gastelum, of course, he did get rocked against Rick Story too. So his defense and his chin is a little bit of a concern in this spot because Musoke, again, on the feet, he is talented. He could definitely throw down some leather and, the exchanges will be back and forth. He's got enough power to make things interesting for Gastelum in his spot, but I still think that it is, Gastelum's fight to win or lose here in this spot. I think that, again, on the feet, he's got a little bit more power. He is a southpaw. I think he's going to be able to land on Musoke on the feet, and then he is going to be able to take the fight to the ground when he wants to, maintain top position, and drop some ground and pound, and probably grind Musoke out here. So it's a pretty clear-cut fight for Gastelum in this spot. I mean, Musoke has looked pretty good overall. In the UFC, you got to give him credit for getting the W's that he has, but at the same time, I think there's a bigger upside of Gastelum for sure, and I think he's going to continue his streak of wins going in this spot, and he's going to continue to maintain that undefeated record. If there's going to be a fighter to beat Gastelum right now, I don't think it's going to be Musoke. So I think it is going to be Gastelum's fight to win or lose, and I think he is going to pull it off. And
I'm in complete agreement this time around. I just think Gastelum is a really solid future. This kid, the sky's the limit. I've said that a couple times, but in this case, this is a guy that people have a lot of hype around, and it's deserved. He's the youngest winner of the Ultimate Fighter. He's looked pretty solid in all of his UFC fights, and he just is coming off of the biggest win of his career, beating Rick Story in his last fight. Granted, he had a scary moment when he ate a big shot from Story, but he came back strong, showed a lot of heart, and won the decision. It was a solid performance. Now, Musoke, what else can you say about him? He's stepped up and won 2 fights, I believe, as the underdog both times, and he's looked pretty solid both times around. So you got to give him some credit. And he's a significant underdog this time. So UFC just keeps throwing him in there against guys that they expect him to lose against. And he keeps defying them. So, but I just think that streak's going to end this time around. Yusuke's pretty talented, but the problem here is I just think Gastelum's a little bit better in all areas. The only thing Yusuke's really got on him is he's a little longer, a little taller, and Yusuke, he might be able to jab a little bit, but he really doesn't have that great a striking ability. On the feet, Yusuke eats some decent shots and he gets hurt. His biggest strength is usually when he gets fights to the ground where he scrambles well, he throws up some decent submissions. Now the problem is Gastelum is excellent on the canvas. He's very aggressive. He moves well. He's got great hips. And if he takes Yusuke down, I really think there's very little chance that he'll be able to submit Gastelum from his back. So I really see Yusuke getting stuck on his back and either eating some ground and pound until he gets finished, or if the fight stays standing, Gastelum probably outworks him on the feet and either scores a decision or knocks him out on the feet. I just really think that Gastelum should be able to outwork him just about everywhere. Yusuke will have some issues here, and unless he gets like a fluke submission or he's made a drastic leap in overall skill in between these last couple fights, then I just think Gastelum should be able to have a huge performance here because, honestly, this is a bit of a step down in competition after beating Rick Story, a guy that was a fringe top 15 fighter, and it looks like UFC is going the slow route in terms of pushing Gastelum. So my pick is definitely Kelvin Gastelum. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a ranked featherweight matchup between Cub Swanson, who is 20-5 overall, taking on Jeremy Stephens, who's 23-9. Now Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Swanson opened -190 to come back on Stephens +150, and more support on Cub Swanson early on. It's been steady, actually. Swanson is now -255 to come back on Stephens +215. I think the line's getting a little bit steep, honestly. I think Stephens could definitely hang in there. I mean, both these guys are tremendous fighters. I mean, they've been around the UFC for a long time, and deservingly so. Since Stephens has dropped to 145, I mean, the guy's looked phenomenal. He kind of had as a resurgence in his career, which is much needed. He was starting to definitely look like he was on the decline at 155. But again, I think he's putting in the work in the gym. He's a better version of himself at 145 for sure. His takedown defense, as proven in his last fight, is a lot more solid. He still is bringing that nasty KO power that he's always had with him down to 145 as well. So he's a little bit more fierce, and he's just, his fight IQ is starting to develop and get a little bit better. But that being said, I mean, Swanson is climbing the ranks of 145 and in title contention for a reason. I mean, the guys look phenomenal. Talk about improvement. The guy keeps on improving with every fight. He's fought nothing but top tier competition his last few fights, and he's shined. I mean, it's hard not to pick Swanson in this spot. I think that overall his footwork and his movement will probably give Stephens a little bit of trouble on the feet. He's got knockout power, of course. He's very smart. He's just getting, again, even his fight IQ improves from fight to fight. And like, you got to credit a lot of that to his team and Greg Jackson and crew as well. I think that he continues to improve his game because of those guys. With all the support, he's getting more confidence mentally and is showing in his fight. So I think Swanson, as far as wrestling goes, I mean, offensively, he's definitely the better wrestler of the two as well. He can get some takedowns. His submission game's a little bit better. His sub defense overall, he has been submitted, of course, in the past. Both these guys have, but I think Swanson overall, as far as the grappling realm, is a little better as well. So some advantages definitely to Swanson in this fight, but I think where the line is now, it's almost getting to be a dog or pass situation. Stephens definitely, like I said, looks a lot better at 145. He has that knockout power. Swanson has been rocked in fights before. He's been knocked out before in his career. And Stephens, man, I mean, he just hits like a truck. I mean, the guy has nasty knockout power. So Swanson's not careful, he can definitely get clipped by Stephens and get put out. So I think, this is going to be a competitive fight back and forth. Stephens is a very strong fighter at 145. Swanson's the better overall fighter. So we're going to see a war. I'm not sure if it's going to hit the cards because both these guys have so much finishing potential. But until it lasts, I think that this is going to be a really exciting fight. So I think it might be a dog or pass situation with Stephens though. But as far as a pure pick, you have to lean with Swanson.
And I agree. I think Swanson is the favorite for a reason. The main thing that I see when I look at this fight is I just think that Swanson has a little bit more experience in the featherweight division. He's beat a little bit better competition in the featherweight division. I mean, just look at the guys that he's gone in there against. The only loss he had was to recent title contender Ricardo Lamas since he moved over to the UFC, and he's been just knocking off top guys. Charles Oliveira, Ross Pearson, you name it. He's looked absolutely fantastic so far in this 5-fight winning streak that he's been on, and he's been finishing everybody. The only time he didn't finish somebody was Dustin Poirier, who's another top 5, top 10 level fighter, and he still won a solid decision there. I think Stevens, he's been on a bit of a Cinderella story since dropping down to featherweight. Obviously, the first win over Esteban Payan isn't anything special, but his last 2 wins were. Honey Jason is a solid featherweight, and so is Darren Elkins. That was a legitimate win. He was able to avoid the takedowns and land some big shots on the feet. The problem here is Darren Elkins is not a very good stand-up fighter, and I think that he might be a little overrated from that performance, because he did look really good there. And he might get sent a little bit back to earth, because people forget, before he dropped down to featherweight, he was a middle of the road to even lower tier lightweight. He came off a brutal knockout loss to Yves Edwards, who I believe is about to either retire or get cut from the UFC. And you just don't immediately become a contender from dropping down. So I think this is going to be a reality check for Jeremy Stevens. He does hit very hard, but I don't think he's very technical. He kind of just throws big bombs, and if they do connect, then yeah, he can win. I mean, he could absolutely clip Cub Swanson and get a victory here, but I think it's much more likely that Swanson's the one that lands that strike. I think Swanson is much more technically sound. He throws with bad intentions, but he does it the right way. He usually keeps his defense up, and I think if this fight goes to the canvas, while Stevens is a pretty good wrestler, I think Swanson forces better scrambles. I think Swanson has a better BJJ game, so he'll put himself in better positions if the fight goes to the canvas. So I really see Cub Swanson having an advantage just about everywhere, except maybe in physical strength. And as long as he avoids that big haymaker from Stevens, then I can definitely see Swanson either outpointing Stevens or potentially finishing him as well. So my pick is Cub Swanson. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, I think it's a little more clear, at least for me, that Swanson has the advantages here. I looked at this matchup in more detail on the website. I just think Swanson, he has been in the cage with some absolute top talent already. He's on a very good win streak, and he has performed quite well. His effectiveness, his total efficiency rating is very good. It's higher than Stevens. I think also the strength of competition is different. Now, granted, Stevens, there's some mixing in different weight classes in there that I have to account for, but still, Cub Swanson is a very, very accurate striker. And Stevens, while he does have a very high knockdown rate and a lot of career knockdowns, he's not necessarily the type of guy that instigates the exchanges. I mean, I think he's more of a counter power striker. He doesn't keep up with his opponents. He operates at a slower pace. And I think Swanson should be winning the exchanges and the more active fighter. So round to round, Swanson is going to be landing more and attempting more. And I think that favors him to win the rounds. It also favors him, he doesn't punch lightly either. And we've seen him actually on quite a streak here with a lot of KOs. Whatever he didn't have way back when he got knocked out by Jose Aldo in 8 seconds, he's found it, and I just think you're right. He has continued to evolve his game. He's in the right place for that with Greg Jackson, and he keeps getting better all around. He's looked very good against very talented fighters, and so I've got to lean Swanson here. I'm not sure how it ends, one way or the other. I think Swanson comes out on top, but if they do stand in trade, like I think most of the fans want to see, you're right. Stevens has that puncher's chance. For sure. He packs a lot of power. But Swanson, I think, is going to be the one connecting first. And I think even more so now than ever. These stats are career stats. I think he's looked even sharper. So maybe these stats are a bit of averaging, whereas he might be even better than what I'm looking at on paper.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 44. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll be posting them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.